Right now, as we speak, over 3,000 distinct ethnic groups across Africa are fighting for recognition, but only a handful dominate the global narrative. This isn't just about culture, it's about political power, economic resources, and whose stories get told. I am your host, and today we're diving deep into one of Africa's most sensitive but crucial conversations: ethnic representation and media attention. Why do the Maasai of Kenya get documentaries while the Sira people of Senegal remain invisible? Why do international outlets cover Fulani conflicts but ignore the struggles of smaller pastoralist communities? Like this video help more Africans see this story. Let us start with the numbers that will shock you. Africa is home to over 3,000 ethnic groups speaking more than 2,000 languages. Yet when you search African tribes or watch documentaries, you'll see the same faces: Maasai warriors jumping in Kenya, Himba women with red ochre in Namibia, maybe some Tuareg nomads in Mali. But what about the Hadza hunter-gatherers of Tanzania? The Boka people of Cameroon? The Khoikhoi communities of South Africa? This isn't accidental. Colonial administrators created artificial hierarchies, elevating certain groups as noble or warrior-like while dismissing others as primitive or insignificant. The French romanticized the Tuareg as blue men of the desert. The British mythologized Maasai as the ultimate African warriors. These colonial fantasies became the foundation for modern tourism and media representation. But here's where it gets political. In post-independence Africa, the ethnic groups that captured international attention often translated that visibility into political advantage. Take Kenya. The Maasai's global recognition helped them secure land rights and tourism revenue that other pastoralist communities never achieved. Meanwhile, groups like the Ogiek, Kenya's indigenous hunter-gatherers, fought for decades just to have their existence acknowledged by their own government. The tourism industry amplified these disparities exponentially. A single Maasai village can generate thousands of dollars monthly from cultural tourism, while equally rich cultures remain economically marginalized because they're not Instagram-ready. This creates a vicious cycle. Visible groups get resources to preserve their culture, while invisible groups lose theirs to poverty and assimilation. Let me give you a concrete example that illustrates this perfectly. When international cricket matches happen between Pakistan and South Africa, global media covers every detail. But when the Khoikhoi people of South Africa, the continent's oldest inhabitants, hold cultural ceremonies, international outlets are nowhere to be found. The sporting event gets millions of viewers, the cultural preservation gets none. Subscribe and hit the bell for more honest Pan-African analysis. Now, let us talk about the key players perpetuating this imbalance. First, we have international media outlets, your CNNs, BBCs, National Geographic channels. Their editorial decisions about which stories to cover literally shape global perceptions of African diversity. When they need an African story, they reach for familiar tropes: Maasai for Kenya, Zulu for South Africa, Baba for North Africa. Second, African governments themselves often play favorites with ethnicity. Political elites from dominant groups channel resources toward their communities while marginalizing smaller ones. In Nigeria, while Yoruba and Igbo cultures get significant government support and international recognition, over 500 smaller ethnic groups struggle for basic acknowledgement. Third, the academic and research community bears responsibility. Western anthropologists historically focused on groups that fit their exotic expectations, creating an academic literature bias toward spectacular cultures. This academic bias then influenced policy, tourism, and media for generations. Tourism boards and cultural institutions form the fourth pillar of this system. They market the greatest hits of African culture because it's easier to sell established brands than to educate tourists about lesser-known communities. It's economically rational but culturally destructive. But here's where perspectives get really complex, and why subscribe for honest, Pan-African analysis you want to find on CNN or BBC. Some argue this visibility gap actually protects smaller communities from cultural exploitation and tourism's negative impacts. The Hadza people of Tanzania, for instance, have maintained their hunter-gatherer lifestyle partly because they avoided the cultural commodification that has affected the Maasai. Others contend that visibility equals survival in the modern world. Without international attention, smaller ethnic groups lose access to funding for cultural preservation, educational resources in their languages, and political advocacy for their rights. The Indigenous people of Kenya, displaced from their ancestral lands around Lake Bogoria, might have suffered in silence if not for international human rights attention. There is also the authenticity debate. Some critics argue that popular groups like the Maasai have become so commercialized that their traditional performances are now theater for tourists rather than genuine cultural expression. Meanwhile, lesser-known groups maintain authentic practices precisely because they are not performing for cameras. Yet another perspective focuses on Pan-African identity. Some intellectuals argue we should move beyond ethnic particularism entirely, embracing broader African unity rather than highlighting divisions between groups. But this view often comes from members of already visible communities who don't understand the erasure experienced by marginalized ones. So what does this mean for Africa's future? This attention imbalance has profound implications for development, democracy, and cultural survival across the continent. When international donors and investors think Africa, they think of the familiar faces they've seen in media. This shapes funding decisions, development programs, and economic opportunities. Consider this: climate change is devastating pastoralist communities across the Sahel, but international climate funding overwhelmingly goes to programs focused on well-known groups like the Fulani, while smaller pastoralist communities receive nothing. It is not intentional discrimination, it is the result of visibility bias in global consciousness. Politically, this creates dangerous dynamics. In countries where ethnic identity influences voting patterns, groups with international visibility can leverage that attention for domestic political advantage. This can exacerbate ethnic tensions and marginalize already vulnerable communities even further. But here is the hopeful part: digital media is starting to democratize cultural representation. African content creators on platforms like TikTok and YouTube are showcasing their own communities without waiting for international media approval. Young Africans are telling their own stories, and some are going viral in ways that bypass traditional gatekeepers entirely. Subscribe and hit the bell. We're rebuilding a community of Africans who refuse to let others define our narrative. The solution isn't to reduce attention on well-known groups, it is to expand the spotlight. African media houses need to invest in documenting lesser-known communities. Governments need policies ensuring cultural preservation funding reaches all ethnic groups, not just politically connected ones. International organizations need to audit their programming for ethnic bias. Most importantly, we Africans need to become curious about our own diversity. How many Nigerians can name 5 ethnic groups from their own country beyond the big 3? How many Kenyans know about the Daholo people who speak a unique click language? This isn't just about fairness, it is about preserving the incredible human diversity that makes Africa the cradle of humanity. Every ethnic group that disappears takes with it unique knowledge about medicine, agriculture, governance, spirituality, and human adaptation. We're not just losing cultures, we're losing solutions to problems we don't even know we face. The path forward requires conscious effort from all of us. Media professionals need to actively seek out underrepresented stories. Travelers need to venture beyond the tourist trail. Researchers need to study communities that don't fit their preconceptions. And African governments need to remember that their job is representing all their people, not just the visible ones. Check out this next video where we explore how digital technology is helping preserve endangered African languages. The future of African cultural diversity might just depend on smartphones and social media and the young Africans using them to keep their traditions alive. What ethnic groups from your country do you think deserve more attention? Comment your thoughts below. Let's start building a more complete picture of African diversity together. Because every culture has stories worth telling, and it is time the world had all of them.